Tim, welcome to the show. What's something that perhaps most people don't know about Wintrust?
For us, it's about serving communities in a different way. People matter. And where you take care of people in a fashion that they appreciate and that builds loyalty to the bank, a well-run participant financial institution in a community is an asset. There are people in our communities that if you ask them why they were successful, they would point to the bank. I think it is meaningful. The challenge from a culture standpoint is as we grow and we're successful is to stay small, continue to win a community at a time, to be relevant in all the markets that we participate in. Companies headquartered thousands of miles away from the communities in which we operate won't do as good a job as we will. If we just keep doing what we're doing and we keep being important and keep listening to people in the community, we'll be successful. And we just can't get away from that.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. I'm happy to be here.
Really looking forward to today's conversation. We're going to be covering, I think, a few different sort of key aspects, but really looking at the role of the local bank within local communities, the key role it plays in local communities, and the business model that you guys at Wintrust run, which I think is fascinating, maybe even unique. Before we jump in to all that, you've been with the bank quite a while now.
18 years.
18 years. What was it that drew you in? And then what was it that's kept you there?
I worked for a competitor who, for a period of time, had a similar model. And Wintrust was really just doing a terrific job in the Chicagoland community at the time, serving clients. And my predecessor, a gentleman by the name of Ed Waymer, was just doing a good job convincing people that this was the best alternative in terms of banking options. And so was the case then, and I think it's the case now, that people wanted to work for Wintrust. People not only proud to work here, but frankly, it's fun.
So you mentioned Ed there. What was it that he had built the company around that kind of built up that culture, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the strategy was to be the alternative to the big banks. And at the time in Chicago, there was banking consolidation and the big banks were getting bigger. But the premise was that our model, the community bank model, was a level of, or could be a level of differentiated service that would be appealing to clients. That was particularly true in the first community Ed operated in, and then subsequent communities that really appreciated a local option, and been the cornerstone of our model, and it's made a big difference.
What's something that perhaps most people don't know about Wintrust?
I guess the primary answer would be our model. So there's 16 individual banks. And so somebody in any given community might know us as Lake Forest Bank and Trust, or might know us as the local community bank. But we have a level of sophistication and the level of service that other clients, particularly larger commercial clients or wealth-related clients, would appreciate. And so it's really the breadth of service delivered in a very local fashion that clients appreciate. And sometimes they know that, sometimes they don't.
Why is it that you think community local banks still matter in today's financial ecosystem?
Well, to start with, there are fewer community banks, and so we're becoming a little bit less common in terms of how we compete. For us, it's about serving communities in a different way, and we talk about building sustainable communities where people matter and where you take care of people in a fashion that they appreciate and that builds loyalty to the bank. And then also the aspects of community, about building communities that are successful, that create an environment for us as a bank to be a useful participant in that community. Whether it's helping from a social services standpoint, or it's helping with green space, or it's helping to start a chamber of commerce, we think we can add value to the community. And when we do that, we get rewarded with loyalty and the opportunity to do business in that community as a meaningful partner.
I saw some really interesting stuff about the banking sector recently. Since the creation of the Fed, the number of banks has kind of dwindled. And I remember, I forget the guy's name now, but he was drawing connections to the fact that communities that still had kind of a vibrant local financial system were those that were thriving, and those areas of the country that were perhaps not doing so well economically guess what? They didn't have a kind of diverse range of banking options.
Yeah, I haven't seen the study, David, but I think that's right. I mean, a well-run participant financial institution in a community is an asset. And so whether it's providing everyday transactional services or it's making loans to allow small businesses to prosper, I mean, that's an important part of a healthy economy. We talk a lot about the mortgage market, for example, people, trying to pursue home ownership or to move from, one home to another as their children, or family grow. I think it is meaningful. And so those statistics make sense to me. There used to be, 15,000 banks in the United States. It's something like 4,000 now. And so certainly consolidation's happening.
Why do you think that consolidation has happened?
Well, there's probably a whole lot of reasons. I mean, scale matters. It's becoming more expensive to deliver financial services in a compelling way. And so whether it's more expensive technology or more expensive regulation or expensive to have a building, it's difficult. And so I think you're seeing larger banks. And for us, the challenge is as a larger bank or as a growing bank that's been successful to deliver services that are meaningful to the community in a way that's friendly to them. And so you don't have to call a call center 1,000 miles away, and you don't have to, give up on talking to a person face to face if that's how you'd like to do business.
And obviously, so the Wintrust model has been trying to create those efficiencies while remaining local within the community, right? How do you decide what to kind of bring in and decentralize and what to leave with the local bank?
David, we turn that around and we ask what shouldn't be centralized. And the answer to that is things that touch the customer. So we want to serve customers on their terms. We want to be available when they need the assistance. And so what we try to do is keep as much of the customer interaction as local as we possibly can. And so we empower senior leaders in the community to make decisions for clients, to work with them in terms of their needs, and to the extent that we're participating in the community, deciding how we do that in a most impactful way. And so the answer is a lot of things that don't impact customers get centralized. The things that are most important to customers stay local.
So one of the 16 banks that are under your umbrella versus a kind of national, let's say a Chase. Why is that local bank going to be more beneficial to someone in that community, perhaps, than going into a Chase?
Well, one, there's a lot of terrific banks, and Chase is a fantastic bank. They're all over the country. But they're not necessarily people that are living in your community. They're not people that you're seeing on the weekend playing softball with your children. They're not as invested in the success of a business down the street. And so while many of the services that banks offer are fairly similar, the way you deliver those services are not. And frankly, if we can provide solutions to small businesses, if we can provide the opportunity for people to get advice, it matters, and it differentiates us versus the larger competitors. And in most of our markets, we compete with the largest competitors, and we do so very effectively.
What's the vision for the group moving forward? Is it to continue to grow and to look to bring new banks into the group?
Well, it's certainly to grow. The challenge from a culture standpoint is, as we grow and we're successful, is to stay small. So continue to win a community at a time, to be relevant in all the markets that we participate in. Companies headquartered thousands of miles away from the communities in which we operate won't do as good a job as we will. And so if we just keep doing what we're doing and we keep being important and keep listening to people in the community, we'll be successful. And we just can't get away from that.
How do you maintain that, I guess, sort of culturally, you as a leader, but as a leadership team there? How do you ensure that focus on the local community remains in place? It must be very easy to kind of zoom out and start to look at things from a kind of macro perspective.
It is. You're correct. I mean, it's the cultural element of staying relevant and staying small is difficult. And I worry about it every night when I go to sleep. It's simple to bring a solution that maybe it saves the bank a little bit of money, or maybe it is easier for some of the employees in the bank. And we have to fight that every day. And and we have to look at things from the lens of our customers. If it makes sense for our customers, then we can talk about how do we do it more efficiently, how do we do it differently, but not if it compromises the way we deliver services.
And you said a line when you and I spoke previously, which I kind of noted down when we were talking a bit about this, which was, we do a good job of getting to what matters.
I think that's right. I mean, it's easy to get bogged down in things that don't matter, particularly to your customers. And so we have to stay focused on what does matter, what makes a difference, and how we continue to look different than our larger competitors. People have choices. And so we need to be the preferred choice. We need to be the better choice.
And how do you apply that mantra to all those local communities? Do you generally find kind of people are people and what matters across the board, or how does that work?
Well, no. I mean, I think that's the secret sauce is no two communities are alike. And so a solution in one community in West Michigan or in one of the neighborhoods of Chicago or in Milwaukee is entirely different than the solution for another community. And so our local senior leaders are charged with understanding what's best in the community and delivering the best execution in that community. And that's the heart of the difference. The question you asked is the heart of the difference.
When you think about what matters and you kind of look at a specific community, can you share with us perhaps a time where the thing that really mattered perhaps surprised you?
Well, all communities are sort of different economic, states, the different degrees of maturity. And so in some communities, what they need are support around athletics, or they need a way for children to experience, what other children experience in more affluent communities. And for example, in one of the areas in Chicago, a challenged community, we helped set up a chamber of commerce. And what they needed was economic development. They needed people to talk about how they create jobs in their community and how those jobs will lead to people buying houses and how people buying houses will lead to retail establishments. And so it's rarely simple, and it takes persistence, which is why it's hard for others to do, because it's not writing a check. And I think when we talked before, David, we talked about the difference between investment and philanthropy. And it's, in our mind, an investment in these communities. It's the ability to help them become more sustainable, to help them become better places to work. And there are lots of very generous financial institutions and corporations, and they write checks, and that's very much appreciated and helpful, but it's different.
It's probably a gross oversimplification. Apologies if so, but it's kind of like teaching the fisherman to fish, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to...
Well, I think that's fish. Right, or in our case, and it takes a lot for communities to succeed, and we're not suggesting that we're the majority player, but I think our contributions make a difference. And I think we're well equipped to help the local community leaders execute in ways that create sustainable communities that are healthy for families and create jobs and are nice places to live, and schools do well. It feeds on itself when you get it going the right direction.
What are some of the data points or indicators that you use to track community impact?
Yeah, it's not always easy to measure, particularly early on. For us, for example, our employees delivered over 27,000 volunteer hours. We have 700 or more employees that serve on local boards of directors. We make SBA loans, Small Business Administration loans, which are loans to facilitate entrepreneurship. And we made over 5,000 of those last year. We made 300 or so community development loans. Again, it's not any one piece, but you put these things together and they add up. And we're particularly proud of the volunteer hours and of the real on-the-ground commitment of our employees as board members.
A while ago, we had the CEO of FNB. Mm-hmm. He was talking about the kind of impact that they've had on their community in Pittsburgh. And you could see what it meant to him, the role that they've been able to play in kind of regenerating, the part of the city that he mm-hmm. grew up in. We hear so much about the kind of, the bad things that banks may or may not do in the kind of the economy. And certainly from me doing this and speaking to people like you and like Vincent, learning about the huge positive impact that community banks can have, I think it's I think it's amazing, and perhaps something that doesn't get discussed as much as it perhaps could do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we don't talk about them because we respect, our clients' confidentiality, but there are people in our communities that if you ask them why they were successful, they would point to the bank. And they would say, I got to start when nobody else believed in me. Wintrust did. They helped me along, and they've helped me since. And it's a very rewarding conversation when unsolicited somebody comes and tells you that. And again, it's just a piece of the puzzle, but we think it's one that we deliver better than our competitors.
So I imagine stories like that, they'll probably be quite a powerful tool for kind of really engaging your employees, your workforce. How do you gather all these kind of success stories in, and how do you use those to build the culture within the bank?
Yeah, we have a team, we have a community impact team that collects the stories, and to the extent that we can share them and our clients allow us to do that, in some cases the client's a community, in other cases it's actually a business entity, we try to share them. And we not only share them, we celebrate them. I mean, these are wins for the bank when we can point to somebody that's successful because we've played a role for them. And it's very rewarding. It's very fulfilling. And we look for people to work at the bank who appreciate that and who are willing to become engaged in their communities. And the perfect scenario, and it's true in many of our communities, is the people working for our bank live in those communities. Those are jobs that we've created. Their children are going to school down the street. They might be running a business that's around the corner.
What's a success story that you're perhaps most proud of?
Well, I think there's a number of communities where banks historically have been absent, and we've gone into the community often with a degree of skepticism by the local officials, and we've opened a facility, and we've hired people from that community, and we've supported the social services agencies in that community, and we've volunteered in the community. And in time, sometime months, sometimes years, you see things changing the community. It becomes vibrant. And there are many communities that by some official designation were low or moderate income communities, where we entered that community that are no longer low or moderate income. The economic environment's improved, the number of jobs have improved. And those are successes. I mean, that feels really good.
Which goes to what we were saying before about having the presence of lenders, and credit is everything. One of the very first episodes we did was with a gentleman called Professor Muhammad Yunus. I'm sure if you recognize the names. He won a Nobel Economics Prize. One thing he said was a human right that's not kind of codified, but should be, is everyone should have the right to credit.
Yeah, and as a financial institution, it's our responsibility to provide access to those services. And sometimes it's credit. And certainly we look to provide that. And where we can't, there are programs that we can facilitate that people don't know. But sometimes it's payments too. If somebody says, I have a business problem, and if I need to purchase product and I'm buying it from another country, or I'm buying it, that requires a certain types of payment, we help facilitate that. And so I hope that sometimes people talk about us as problem solvers, because we're trying to help them succeed and trying to help them solve problems that make them more successful.
For you, Tim, sitting on top of, I guess, sort of diverse organization, where do you spend your time? What's your focus as the kind of group CEO?
Well, I try to spend a third of my time with customers. Feedback's essential. Mostly positive feedback, which again is really nice. Sometimes not so positive feedback. A third of the time with our people, trying to make sure that we kind of keep the culture as it should and try not to deviate from our mission. And then maybe a third of the time on operational, running the business type of things. And on any given day, it's obviously different than that, but the closer we can stay to the customer, the better. And for us, a lot of companies have a lot of PowerPoint and they have a lot of data and they do all sorts of things. If you start by asking the question, is this good for our customers, you get to the right answer more often than not. And it's not always that simple, but a lot of the time it is that simple.
And you especially if you're asking that question, you have the benefit because you've also, like you say, you've consciously spent a significant amount of your time with the customers.
I try to, for sure. And I want to understand from them what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. And sometimes they know it before we know it. And even if it's not completely right, and that's a client's perception about what the bank is doing, it's important that we address that. And so whether it's feedback from customers or feedback from communities, it's important.
And what does that look like? Is that you going out, speaking to people face to face, phone calls? Are you using data? How are you gathering that sort of key information about them?
Well, all of the above, but it's more important that in our model, the local leaders are gathering that information. And that's what they're charged with doing, to understand the community and the needs of the community better than other financial institutions and better than I can do it. And so we empower those people to make decisions and try to push the allocation of resources in some cases, the decision around credit to our market leaders who in theory will respond more elegantly, in some cases faster, and with a better understanding of that local situation.
How do you assess if that local leader is doing those things?
Oh, I think pretty quickly. I mean, if you talk to somebody in the community and they say, Tim is really terrific, he's helping, people want to give us positive feedback. They want to be effusive about what the bank is doing. And if that's not the case, we're probably not making enough progress. But relative to many of our competitors, if you go and you say, who's responsible for the bank in town, more often than not, they're going to know the name of our person.
Are you looking for a certain type of character in that case? Someone who is sort of quite outgoing and builds those relationships?
Well, different for different jobs. We certainly value entrepreneurship. We value people who are trying to help others solve problems, people that want to be engaged. We ask our leaders to be engaged, again, serving on boards, volunteering their time. It feeds on itself. We tend to get that type of folks. And I think over time, they seek out other people like them. And on top of that, we get recommendations all the time. I mean, people like banking with Wintrust, and they know other talented people and committed people in the community, and they'll say, you ought to talk to Susie or you ought to talk to Bill. They would fit really well with you.
What advice would you give to other leaders who are listening, who are trying to build purpose-driven institutions that have impact on the local community?
I would caution people not to make things more complicated than they need to be. The banking business isn't a difficult business. At its core, it's take deposits and then turn around and lend that money to clients. And to do it in a responsible way with a focus on risk management for the shareholders of the bank, but more importantly, to help customers and to help businesses be successful. And I just come back to do what's right for your customer. And you have to do it in a responsible way, and you need controls, but it doesn't need to be complex.
I'm correct in thinking Wintrust is privately held, right?
It's not. We're publicly traded. And David, to that point, our board and the boards of each of our 16 individual banks are responsible for not only the performance of the bank for our shareholders, but for our success in the communities in which we operate. And when we select board members, one of their specific responsibilities is to determine whether the bank's delivering in the community the way it should. And our board members are often local leaders in the communities in which we operate.
Makes perfect sense. So the community does well, the bank does well.
Right.
Vice versa.
And again, I'd get back to the complexity part. It's almost that simple. If we can operate in communities that are doing well and are thriving, it's certainly a good reason that we would be doing well in that community.
Again, as we look into the future, where does perhaps the growth of Wintrust stop? I'm thinking particularly from a kind of geographic point of view. Do you kind of have sort of borders as to where you see that your operations should be and end? Or how do you think about that?
Well, we do and we don't. Our retail banking footprint, so a Wintrust branch or a community bank that uses the Wintrust name, operates primarily in 3 states, Wisconsin, maybe 4, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. But our niche businesses, our commercial businesses are nationwide. And in fact, in a couple of cases, international. And so we've tried to take the community-focused approach to geography and transition that to businesses where we think we can provide specialized services that differentiate Wintrust relative to other providers in those areas.
And what do you see as the kind of services of the future that you think businesses are going to need?
Fewer and fewer people are coming into our branches. So certainly high tech, high touch is the way we talk about it, where when people need advice and want to see us face to face, there are ways to do that. But increasingly, many of these services are delivered either online or through mobile apps with some sort of support available. Business is moving faster. And so things that used to be a 2 or 3 day type of experience now take minutes. And so we're transitioning to provide those services in the way that the customers expect them. And if we do a good job, we'll try not to force a customer into something. We'll give them the choice. But certainly our business is evolving.
It's about obviously giving the customer what they want. But with technology moving so quickly, how do you balance wanting to kind of be at the front edge of what's happening within the industry versus making sure you're just listening to customers and keeping it as simple as possible, like you said before?
I guess there's a couple answers to that. One, even a bank our size, and we're one of the top 25 or so publicly traded institutions in the United States. Technology is expensive and complex. And frankly, we use a lot of partners that deliver best-in-class services. And so we don't necessarily have to build it. We just have to deliver it in a fashion that's useful to our customers. And I think from a strategy standpoint, the ability to do that is becoming more and more important. To put together products in a particular way that are meaningful to customers and to deliver best-in-class products that we might not manufacture. So a lot of what we do is distribution.
We have a kind of end-of-episode tradition that we do here where we ask each guest the same 2 questions.
Okay, give it a shot.
Yeah, we've had some, as you can imagine, we've had some quite varied answers to these. What's one thing you've changed your mind about recently?
I have the good fortune to serve on some boards in the Chicago area, and I guess one of the things that's evolving pretty quickly is higher education. And I'm a huge fan of education and higher education, but I think our models to deliver education and to create economic opportunity for young people may not always include a 4-year path that, in some cases might be very expensive. And so I think our higher education system needs to continue to evolve. And they are in many cases, and I think there are great examples of that. But I think there's change coming in that world.
Interesting. You might have seen me smile as you said that.
Oh.
I think 3 of the last 4 guests we've talked to now have raised this point of higher education. We had a CEO on recently who'd actually gone as far as building kind of his own master's degree for universities to teach because it just wasn't there what he felt was required.
Well, I think it's an important point, and we have dozens, if not hundreds, of examples of successful people in our company who don't have a traditional 4-year education.
Yeah,
and they may have started in a teller role or an entry-level role at the company, but bring with them the right commitment to customers and just a common sense approach to business. And it kind of gets to, it doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to make sense. You'll see changes in that world, and I'm a huge fan of education. I'm not sure exactly what form it's going to take in the future.
What's one thing you've not changed your mind about, which is a kind of core belief that you hold dear that you want to share with everybody?
Sure. Well, I'm from Chicago, so one core belief is hot dogs don't get ketchup. And there's a lot of debate, but I'll leave you with that one. From a real sense, I guess The jury's still out, and I'm not a big believer in hybrid work and work away from the office for most jobs. I think for particularly young people, time at the office with more experienced and more successful people, just to understand the environment, to be around the water cooler, as some people say, is pretty important. And we're working through it as a company on our end. Most of our people are back to work for the majority of the work week. And we certainly have days where we ask everybody to be in so that you can get collaboration. But fully understand, what happened in the pandemic and the changes. And there's certainly things that are working. But I think for particularly young people, I think it's really tough working from home.
I can't imagine being a young person in that environment where, you need to be surrounded by people who can, look after you, who can see maybe you've had a bad phone call with a,
right,
client. They can see that that's happened. They can come over, put the arm around you, talk you through it. I think also vice versa as well, kind of like the perhaps the energy and optimism that kind of young people can build and bring into a kind of established team and have people sort of feed.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are clearly talented and senior level people at the company that you would trust and happy to have at home and do their job very effectively, and there'd never be an issue. But those are the people we need training the young people in the office. And so, as you suggest, it works both ways. And I just, think more often than not, and again, there are exceptions, but more often than not, people ought to be at work more than they might have been in the last couple of years.
And I think as well, especially given what you guys do, the impact it actually has on the community at whole, right? Because if people are just staying in their apartment, they're not going into the offices, they're not going to the, the local restaurants, bars, riding on the public transport. It's a community killer almost. Yeah,
and David, during the pandemic, the banks were determined to be an essential service. And so our customer contact people were only away from our customers for a couple of weeks max. And there were a number of programs, including the Payment Protection Act or the Payroll Protection Act and certain credit programs, which we delivered during the pandemic. And Wintrust, I think, was one of the stars in terms of providing those services. And so our customer contact people have been heroes in terms of the service they provided. And it's not the same sort of crisis we've had before, but I think it illustrates the importance of being able to talk to somebody when a particular business has a need or an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure.
David, thank you. Appreciate the time.
There we have it. The CEO and president of Wintrust Bank, Tim Crane. What a fantastic conversation. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Even more importantly, if you know someone who could benefit from the wisdom that Tim shared with us today, please share the episode. I'm David Jepson. We'll see you again next time for CEO Behind the Scenes.